we have got huge swathes of highly competent and confident women, but they are not getting those board positions.
Hi, I'm Zakir Ilyas, and this is Representation Matters, a conversation around equality, diversity, and inclusion in the workplace podcast series by the Equal Group, bringing you stories, insights, and learnings around optimizing equality, diversity, and inclusion in the workplace. Welcome to today's episode, where I'm joined by Sarah Pinch, the Managing Director of a reputation management agency called Pinchpoint Communications and Vice Chair of the organisation Manx Care. Sarah was the president of the CIPR in 2015, and in 2018 she was listed in the Financial Times and Hero's Top 100 Female Champions, which celebrates and supports women in business. Passionate about diversity and inclusion, Sarah is also the chair of the Taylor Bennet Foundation, a diversity charity which supports young BAME people into communication and public relation careers. I had the opportunity to catch up with Sarah to find out more about her experiences and thoughts on some of the diversity issues within the PR and communications industry. Let's take a listen to the conversation, which began with me asking, who is Sarah Pinch?
She's mainly tired. I think this lockdown has been really difficult for everybody, and I think I'm holding on to the positives, which are I live in Bristol.
Right.
So my husband and I took our COVID tests a couple of days ago and got the results last night that they're negative, which is brilliant.
Yeah.
And my parents live in Devon and they've had their jabs, which is absolutely fabulous. I'm really pleased about that. So I'm a communications professional. I've worked in the industry for 21 years. I spent the first 10 years of my career at the BBC as a journalist. And I am very passionate about ethical communications. I do a lot of work with boards and senior leaders across all sectors, but usually when they're going through some kind of change, more often than not a positive change, sometimes an imposed change. But I also, as you say, I have some additional roles as I have two sort of non-exec positions, and then I chair the Taylor Bennet Foundation, which is one of the greatest joys in my professional life.
Amazing. What a great introduction. And so I can see that you are a very busy woman, Sarah, and it's quite clear that you do have a great breadth of experience in various work sectors. So one of the first things that I actually want to ask you today is about your career journey so far. After working as a journalist for the BBC for such a long period of time, why and how did you end up going into the public relations and communication sector?
All I ever wanted to do from being 9 years old was work for the BBC. And I was very fortunate to find very early on what we would now call a sponsor. I don't think that language existed when I was in my school years, but an amazing woman called Fiona Windram, who was the manager of BBC Radio Devon. And I went and did work experience there when I just finished my GCSEs. And then through the whole of my sixth form, I went in every Tuesday afternoon and got more work experience. So by the time I left school, despite the fact that I had a place to read English at Bristol University, I went to work for the BBC, much to my parents' chagrin. And I stayed there for a decade and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And I did really well and I was promoted a lot. And then I went for a job and I didn't get it. And I was utterly devastated. And I was very fortunate to meet a brilliant coach who helped me leave, really. I'd been volunteering for a campaign called Jubilee 2000, which went on to be renamed Drop the Debt and was fronted by Bono, which was asking the developed countries to cancel the debt of the developing countries in 2000. And that charity, or that campaign rather, had been founded by Christian Aid, the development charity. And they advertised for a head of public relations. And one of my colleagues at the BEEB saw the advert and said, I think this is right up your street. So I applied for it and got it. And have been in communications for 21 years.
Oh, wow. And so you've definitely had quite the career journey, and something that you are passionate about in all of your work is diversity and inclusion, particularly when it comes to women in leadership roles. you know, without a doubt, there is a lack of women in senior roles in business. But I think that you are a wonderful role model for many women out there, because, you know, not only do you run a business and hold 2 non-exec positions, but you're also a mother too. And so this leads me to ask you then, you know, what would you say are some of the challenges that you've had to face or overcome in your career so far?
Thank you. I think it's always just get emotional. I always find it very
Oh.
humbling when people say that that I'm a role model, because I think, and I'm just doing my job, and I didn't expect to feel like that. I think the challenges for me have been mainly around positioning communications as a strategic management function and not being sidelined. And I have been exceptionally fortunate in that every job I've had since I left the BBC, I have been the leader. So I have been the most senior comms person in the organisation. And so I haven't had the experience of, being managed in a poor fashion and being, asked to do things that are not appropriate and that you are finding really challenging and difficult. But I have been in the position of setting the culture for teams, and that's something I've always taken incredibly seriously, and I've always wanted to bring people into those teams who bring diversity of thought, of gender, of race, of sexuality, of backgrounds, and really watch them fly. And one of my great joys in life is seeing some of the people that used to work for me in junior positions now, running departments, running organizations. One of my ex colleagues is a very senior journalist at the Guardian, and I'm so proud of him and what he's achieved. And that's wonderful. But in terms of the challenges for me, I think, I have absolutely been mistaken for the secretary in meetings.
Right.
I had a deputy when I was director of comms at the NHS, who actually came and worked with me in the business, Adrian, and we would often go to meetings together and people would think he was in charge. We ended up doing quite a good double act, where if that was happening, Adrian would say, well, obviously I'll have to take that to the director. And then the external person would say, oh, when do you think they might make a decision then? And then he'd dramatically turn to me and say, well, Sarah, what's the decision?
I can imagine how shocked they were.
Yeah, exactly. But I think I have been very lucky. I think in the beginning, I was very lucky to work for some phenomenal men and women. And then I started choosing much more carefully where I went. And, my decision to cut my pay by 30% and leave the private sector and join the NHS was mainly driven by the boss, the chief executive that I was going to work with. And I admired him and his, I suppose, his ethics, the way he worked, his values. But that isn't to say that I haven't, as I say, experienced people thinking that I am there to make the tea, or indeed colleagues thinking that I will make the tea. Directors, equals of mine, because I'm the woman in the room. Sarah will take the notes. No, I'm not. Absolutely not going to do that. And I think that is something that I have learned. Actually, is to not. When I say not be the mum, I don't mean that all mums make the tea and take the notes, but to kind of not fill those stereotypes. And even though I really like making people food and tea, wouldn't that be nice if we could do that? I think one of the challenges that I have experienced more recently is applying for non-executive positions and being told that I was shortlisted for one. I didn't make it through to the interview stage. And when I asked for feedback, that headhunter had nothing, no constructive criticism at all. And in the end, I was kind of like, well, why haven't I got it? Oh, and they said, well, when you see who we've appointed, it'll make sense.
Okay. Yeah.
And they'd appointed, you know, a bloke,
Right.
Sir something, Lord something, who was a friend of a friend, and
Yeah.
you know, I think that is unacceptable. And you know, I was very pleased and very, you know, I'm very honoured to have been appointed to the board of Manx Care, which is a brand new organisation that will oversee health and care on the Isle of Man, which is where my husband is from. And you know, I did ask the question in the interview process. I said, "Are you looking for a certain type of person?"
Yeah.
Because I think there's no point in going through all of that if actually, you know, they actually do want to appoint their friends.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm actually so glad that you mentioned that, because I think that particularly when it comes to women, there is a societal assumption that they are less likely to question and negotiate in the workplace, and, you know, just settle for less, which, you know, shouldn't be the case at all. And there's also something else that you mentioned as well. Oh, yes, about acknowledging your own privilege and how lucky you are to not have to choose between being a mom or having a career. Because I'm sure, as we all know, you know, many women are not in a privileged enough position to have that choice. And so this does bring me on to the next topic of discussion, which is women in senior positions. So around 3 years ago, you actually founded a conference called Spring Forward, which is to support women who want to get into board positions. So if you don't mind telling us, you know, a bit more about the conference, and also from the research, you know, what was identified as the main issues within the workplace that essentially hold women back from getting into the boardroom?
Thank you. So I got to the point. So I guess my thinking around the conference probably started in 2015 when I was president of the Chartered Institute, as you mentioned in the introduction. And you know, I used to stand up in front of lots of people. It was a real honour to be invited to so many events and, you know, celebrations and annual general meetings and all sorts of things. And you know, I sort of started pretty much with the same opening line, which was how honoured I was to be president and how embarrassed I was because there were so few women in leadership positions, and also because of the race diversity in our profession, which is absolutely outrageous. It's appalling, and it's getting worse. You know, the BAME percentage, according to the Chartered Institute of Public Relations, has dropped from 8% to 6%. Well, 8% is pretty shocking. 6% is, you know, what on earth is going on? So I also sort of in my day job, as I said, work a lot with boards, a lot with leaders, and I would often be the only woman in the boardroom. So there would be all their execs, and I'd be the only woman coming in to help them with whatever the issue was. And then I would go out of the boardroom and go and meet, you know, the lead for that department or the head of that division. And there were all these amazing women. And I was like, what is going on? Why aren't they crossing over into the boardroom? So I have a brilliant market researcher who works in the company with me. And Janice and I were talking about it. And she said, well, we could do some research. So we did some research, and it started to show that one of the things was not seeing women like you, not seeing women in the boardroom. So exactly what I had experienced was the reality of a lot of women. So I got together a whole bunch of women who are in the boardroom, and I asked them all to do me an enormous favour and come and speak at our first conference, which was in I've forgotten what year it is, 2018.
Yeah.
And I, you know, the keynote speaker is an amazing woman called Karen Boswell, who I'd had the privilege to work alongside at First Group. And you know, Karen at that time was the head of Hitachi Rail Europe, so one of the most senior women in the railway, very male dominated industry, and a woman who had not changed who she was very proud of how she had got to that position. She didn't go to university. You know, she started off as a catering manager in the hospitality sector and has, you know, literally worked her way
up.
And then we did some more research, and so the things, and we've done some more actually. We did some more in lockdown, and we're going to publish that in time for International Women's Day in March.
That's great.
You know, I'm still very frustrated, and I am becoming more angry about it because there is not a lack of competence. And there is not a lack of confidence in women. We have got huge swathes of highly competent and confident women, but they are not getting those board positions. And, you know, we've asked some very detailed questions about, have you applied for a position on the Exco? Did you get it? How many times did you have to apply? And, you know, women have to apply a lot to get that job. Still this issue of not enough women in the boardroom, and there is still an issue of women not having the right kind of mentoring and coaching. And by that I mean very challenging mentoring and coaching that kind of says, you should go for this. Why are you not putting yourself forward for this? You know, I was only talking yesterday to a highly competent associate director of comms in the public sector, and I said, why don't you apply to be a school governor? She was like, oh, that's a good idea. And I think that's such a brilliant first step onto a board for communicators, and particularly, ironically, particularly if you don't have children, because school governing bodies are stuffed full of parents with a vested interest in the decisions that are made, and heads are crying out for independent thought. So, you know, if anyone listening to this, if one person goes off and applies to be a school governor, I'll be absolutely over the moon. So the conference obviously did not happen last year. I don't think it'll happen this year. But what we do want to do is to create some safe spaces for women who are on boards or have been on boards to tell their stories to women who want to be, and to have small discussions around how do we do that. And we're just looking at whether we put together a pilot mentoring scheme specifically targeting, you know, challenging women
I think that's
to
really
apply
great.
for those roles and helping them get ready to do that.
That's really interesting, and it sounds like a wonderful initiative to have. And, you know, of course, the fact that there are fewer women in senior positions definitely contributes to the gender pay gap, which, you know, frustratingly continues to be a huge issue in society. So I'm curious to know, Sarah, what action would you encourage women to take against this wage difference?
Talk to each other, talk to your male colleagues, those that you trust, ask them what they get paid. And if it's, you know, if you're doing the same job and it's different to you, you know, if they've been there for 10 years and they're doing the same job, okay, maybe that's okay. Maybe that's not okay, because maybe actually you have brought a huge amount of experience with you, and you might have only been there for 2 years, but actually you've been doing that job somewhere else in a much more complex environment. So, you know, I think ask that. I can't say that enough. You know, ask. Read Mrs. Moneypenny's guide to find out, I can't remember what it's called now, but she's written a brilliant book. Heather McGregor, a great friend of mine, founded the Taylor Bennet Foundation. She's written a really good book about women being financially independent. So read her book. It's full of top tips on how to negotiate, and go in and ask the question. You know, and when you get a new job and they say to you, you know, congratulations, it's £45,000, say that's absolutely brilliant, but I wondered whether you might pay me 49. And, you know, just ask, because if you don't ask, you know, what your mother told you is absolutely true. If you don't ask, you don't get. And, you know, and ask for opportunity, ask for being given, you know, that new project, and don't let anybody make a decision about you without you. You know, that's one of the things that came out of our first piece of research, was how many women had been overlooked for a new project, a promotion, you know, the opportunity to be seconded onto something, because someone thought, oh, you know, her dad's just died, or she's just had a baby, or she's got 3 kids, or we think her husband's been made redundant. And actually, most of those women were, I have come back from maternity leave and I definitely want a new project. You know, my dad has just died and I absolutely want to get on to that promotion, because I, you know, why wouldn't I?
Mhm.
And I think, you know, another brilliant book is Why Do So Many Incompetent Men Become Leaders, and What Can We Do About It? And it's written by a bloke. It's not a male bashing book in any way.
Mhm.
But what he says is, you know, and it opens with this scenario of a man and a woman. You know, she's running the department. It's an accountancy firm. He's been recently promoted. They work on a project together. They go to present it to the client. She's a reflector. She's a thinker. She's somebody who takes time. He's all out, guns blazing. The client's so impressed with him,
Mhm.
gives that feedback. He gets further promoted. And she's sitting there going, oh,
Hold on. Yeah.
I did that work. You know, and the author says, if you're a woman and you want to get on, you have to talk about your work. And that is not necessarily, it doesn't come natural to all men either, but it comes more naturally to
Yeah.
more men than it does to women. And I, you know, do not think that your work is going to speak for itself, because it won't. And, you know, we have to do that thing in our appraisals, in our feedback, where we say, I led that work.
Yeah.
That was my idea. You
Needing
know,
to
we need to
speak
get
up.
more comfortable with using the words I.
Yeah, you know, even reflecting on my own behaviors and attitudes, I can see that's completely true. You know, women definitely do find it a lot more difficult to just talk about themselves in a positive way and, you know, self-promote, which is actually very unfortunate because, as you said, there is no lack of talented women out there. And also for the two books that you mentioned, so I will include them in the description of this podcast for those who are interested. And so, you know, from the research that I have done, I've seen, Sarah, that you've campaigned for organisations who want greater gender diversity in the boardroom to implement a brilliant strategy called Rosies Rule. So if you don't mind, could you tell us a bit more about this strategy for those who aren't aware of what it is?
Yeah, pleasure. And actually, we've asked some questions about that in the new research that will come out next month. But so I first came across something called Rooney's Rule about probably about 6 or 7 years ago. And basically, the National Football League in the States, so American football, had a number of very successful Black coaches. And in one season, 2 of them got sacked.
Right.
And one of them had lost a series of games, and one of them, having never lost a series of games before, and one of them had lost one game but had never lost a game before.
Right.
And the owners of the American football team sacked them. And there was a very insightful chap called Mr. Rooney, not Wayne, Mr. Rooney, on the board of the NFL, who said, we need to be really careful because we've just lost 2 of our Black coaches.
Yeah.
And if we don't do something positive, we are running the risk of having only white coaches. And so they instigated something called Rooney's Rule, and Rosie's Rule is based on that.
Yeah.
So it basically says you should interview, in the case of Rosie's Rule, a competent and qualified woman for every senior position that you have. And that's what Rooney's Rule is. It's you interview a competent and qualified Black coach. So it's not favoritism, it's not lowering of standards, but it's saying if you have a shortlist that is all male for your director of finance or your chief operating officer, you need to go back and you need to find a competent and qualified woman to interview.
Yeah.
And if that woman does not get that job, then you need to put in place a whole series of support for them so that they get the next one. And if they don't get the next one, then what we say is that organisation should ask itself some very difficult questions.
Yeah.
Why has she not got the job? Because she can do the job. Is it because she doesn't fit in? Because that is utterly unacceptable feedback.
Yeah.
And, you know, my experience at the Taylor Bennet Foundation just makes me even more passionate about that, because it's hard for women. It's really hard for women from the BAME community, much harder.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I do want to talk about the issue of race within the communications and PR sector. So you are the chair of the Taylor Bennet Foundation, which helps support young BAME people into careers within that sector. So could you tell us a bit more about your role and, you know, how exactly the charity does support these BAME people?
The Taylor Bennet Foundation has been going for about 13 years.
Wow.
So we run flagship training programs which run for 8 weeks, and we take graduates onto those programs. They're massively oversubscribed.
Yeah.
And in fact, only yesterday, I was with the board and we were setting some incredibly exciting but challenging objectives in terms of growing those. So we take people through an 8-week program, and it's a series sponsored by some of the big London agencies, Brunswick, Finsbury. There are a series of masterclasses, project work, teaching, and visits. And I'm absolutely delighted to say that we've been able to do that virtually throughout the whole of last year. And those young people are then basically headhunted to go and work either in that sponsoring agency or in other organisations. And 83% of our graduates are still working in public relations and communications. So it's a very successful programme. We also run a mentoring programme. So perhaps some of those young people who applied onto the flagship programme didn't make it through. And so we support them through mentoring in the hope that they'll be able to find a job. And we also run something called Summer Stars, which is a programme in the summer. And that's open to graduates and people who've recently started in the industry. Or indeed, we have taken some undergraduates as well. And again, that's a kind of intensive period of lectures and workshops, and then all of the young people are sponsored by an agency or an in-house team, and then they go and do an internship, a paid internship.
Oh wow, okay, yeah.
And we pay all of our young people the London living wage, and when we needed to, although we don't at the moment, but when we needed to, we also gave them a travel allowance. So they could come into London from wherever it was they were living.
That sounds absolutely amazing. And, you know, as a young BAME person myself, it is really nice to know that there is something like this available out there to, you know, not only support, but actually raise awareness about the barriers that young Black, Asian, and ethnic minorities face when it comes to entering the world of work. And so, you know, we are nearing the end of the podcast now, but before coming to a close, I do have 2 final questions for you, Sarah. So the first is, you know, what is the best piece of advice that you've been given throughout your career? And then secondly, what message would you like to give to women in particular who are thinking about pursuing a leadership position in the PR and communication sector?
I think there are 2 things that I have really valued in terms of advice, which was when my now husband, my then boyfriend, and I were thinking about getting married, and my best friend said to me, "Is he going to support you, Sarah?" And that is something that I have become much more confident in saying to groups of women, young women that I meet, is choose your partner wisely, because you do not want to be in a relationship that is a competition.
Right.
And you don't want to be in a relationship where, if you want to be a leader, you don't want to be in a relationship where your partner thinks that their career is more important than yours. So I think choose your partner wisely. And I think, you know, it's not radical advice, but if it doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. And walking away from a job might be the best thing that you've ever done. I did it once, leaving without another job to go to. And I really couldn't afford to do that. You know, I had a mortgage to pay. I was living by myself. My parents are not wealthy. It was a very high risk strategy. I'd worked out I could probably be all right for about 3 months, and then I'd literally have to start like selling my car and digging into my very small savings account at the time. But you know, that job had started not to feel right, and it was absolutely the right thing for me to leave. The advice I would give to women who want to get leadership positions is tell someone that's what you want to do. Start saying to your boss, to your friends, to your colleagues, to your network, I am really ambitious to become, you know, a director, the managing director, the chief exec. I really want to move from being a communications officer to a manager, and I'm quite keen to do that in the next 2 years. and this is what I'm going to do.
Mhm.
How can you help me? And I have never, ever, ever in my whole career, I'm 48, ever asked someone for help and they've said no. Never.
Mhm.
Someone has said, I'm sorry, Sarah, I don't have time to meet you for lunch, but I could meet you for coffee. Or someone has said, can't meet you for coffee, but I've got 10 minutes on my commute home, and I'll, not that anyone commutes home, but I'll give you a call. Or now, what's been brilliant, there's been nothing brilliant about this pandemic, but one of the opportunities I think we have is to connect. I've had Zoom and Teams calls all around the world, and that's been wonderful. So I think, take all your courage in both hands and start saying, that is what I want to do next. Can you help? How can you help? And this is what I'm going to do to get ready.
Thank you for that wonderful advice, Sarah, and for actually highlighting the importance of making sure a person's ethics and beliefs really align with an organisation's values, because I do think it is a huge factor that everyone needs to take into consideration when they are deciding whether to work or continue working at an organisation. And so, on that note, then, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today, Sarah, and I really do appreciate you taking the time out to share your knowledge and experiences. I'm sure a lot of listeners will have a lot to take away from today's talk. So once again, thank you so much, and I wish you all the best for the future.
Oh, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks so much for listening today. Wherever you're tuning in from, it would be great to hear about your thoughts and learnings from today's conversation. And if you are interested in getting involved, you can get in touch with us at The Equal Group on Twitter, Instagram and LinkedIn, or via contact@theequalgroup.com. We'd love to have you on the podcast. That's it for today's episode. Until next time, everyone.